It's over opinionated. Opinionated with Josh Scott.
Welcome to Over Opinionated. I'm Darrell McClain. Our regular host, Josh Scott, is under the weather, and so I'm going to bring you some news for the week. The complexities of immigration and the internet narratives, the massive issues behind strange claims about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. It has been a strange election, and at this point, one of the strangest turns in a strange electoral season is the fact that Americans have been debating whether or not the influx of Haitian immigrants into the city of Central Ohio are stealing and killing and eating pets. By now, it should be apparent that this is actually not true. Certainly, what presented as face value is not true. It has not been sourced to any credible source. It appears to have emerged from the internet and perhaps even from a source rather word postings on social media and with the emergence of some memes. And this is to say the digital units that have conveyed its accusation. The Republican nominee, the former President Donald John Trump, picked up on it and began to repeat the claim, even bringing it into a debate with Vice President Kamala Harris. And the Vice President nominee, J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, has repeated some of the same, although with some qualifications. Ohio's governor, Mike DeWine, also a Republican, very clearly, adamantly went on national television to say there is no credible basis for the accusation that Haitian immigrants are killing and eating pets. This is simply, he said, untrue. There is not a single police report to back that up, nor can anyone find a resident there in Springfield, Ohio, who says that their own pets have suffered such a fate. So this appears to be an internet reality, but the liberal media is turning this into a very different story, and quite frankly, conservatives are handling it incompetently. Now we have to ask, is there just a lack of truth or a lack of directness or a lack of candor in what's going on here? So, when President Trump begins to talk about this, is he talking about anything that is real? Well, there is an influx of Haitian immigrants there in Springfield, Ohio. That is very real. As a matter of fact, it would be a problem in any American city of any size. So proportionality being taken into account, you're looking at a city in Springfield, Ohio that is about 60,000 in population. The influx of Haitians coming in, most of them we are told that they are, let's just say that by our own government, they are legally coming in, particularly because a special permission with a very violent situation there in Haiti. So you're looking at a large influx of people who have come just in recent months, just in the past couple of years, and the numbers are staggering. Even the New York Times says that between 12,000 and 20,000 Haitian immigrants, now 12,000 to 20,000 Haitian immigrants. Now remember, this is a city of just 60,000 people. So you can do the math very quickly. And I will state the obvious. This is a city in the United States that is very small. And I'll say this as well. There isn't any city in the country that could handle proportionately this kind of influx without severe problems. And when you're looking at the clash of cultures, you're looking at particularly a very acute problem. Everyone should have sympathy with this town. Everyone should have sympathy with all involved. We should all have sympathy with the government there and the state government with Governor DeWine making public statements just this week on the mainstream news that states needs help from the federal government because the federal government has made decisions that have impacted Springfield, Ohio, and this local community beyond anything that the community can handle. Now, there have been problems. There are always problems when you have an influx of this size in this population. So let's just state if you just had another town this size moving to Springfield, Ohio from another Ohio county, it would still be a problem. But it's particularly a problem when you have a clash of cultures, and that is exactly what is going on in this case. And we need to speak openly and we need to speak honestly about that being a fact. I'm going to do my very best to speak of this in a way that is honest and direct and tries to take this consideration in account. And as a Christian, my goal is to help Christians think about this issue like this and separate the truth from the absolute nonsense. And frankly, there is a lot of nonsense just about everywhere that we look. So I'm going to say some things in the terms of today's edition of the show Over Opinionated that I don't think you're going to get virtually anywhere else. Now, part of this is rooted in my own personal experience. It's also rooted in understanding of what kind of clash of cultures look like. And so when I talk about my own personal experience, let me just say it is actually very personal. I grew up in my teenage years in southern Florida in a coastal community that is called Jacksonville, Florida, and I had a very good experience with people from a place in Florida called Pompano Beach. Our other people call it Pompano Beach. But anyway, the town was the epicenter in terms of the influx of Haitian refugees. They were known as the boat people. We used to call them when I was growing up there, the boat people. They got into boats out of desperation with what was a corrupt government called the Duvalier regime. And when I was growing up, I saw towns, rather sleepy towns in South Florida, increased an incredible influx of immigrants. And frankly, it wasn't the only time. There have been other waves of immigration in Florida from Cubans, and even most Cubans began to settle in Miami as well as areas like Tampa. That had been even previous immigration pattern in Florida. The reality is that Haitian immigrants presented, even back then, a very huge challenge. Now, I want to say I think South Floridians did their very best to be hospitable and understanding. There were conflicts. There were all kinds of pressures. For one thing, you're looking at the clash of cultures. You look at the clash of languages. Even churches that I was very familiar with, like the First Baptist churches, Pompano Beach, Florida, led a push in a denomination in much of the effort. The Southern Baptist Convention even itself tried to help with the refugee ministries, refugee settlements, and we're trying to help the refugees settle in terms of having what they would need to take care of their children. They needed diapers, they needed food, they needed shelter. And several churches in Florida, the biggest being the Southern Baptist Convention, did everything it could to help these new immigrants. And so even when I was growing up, I saw my church was very involved. That was the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I never have talked about this personally before, and even my own late grandfather was involved in that ministry, and that meant me growing up, I saw many times him being involved in this ministry of trying to help immigrants. So I can understand firsthand the context. I understand something that many Americans might not understand, and that is what it means to live in a community where you have a very large influx of immigrants unexpectedly showing up. And that does test just about every social service your community has available. It tests all kinds of things. For instances, I'm not going to go into particulars about automobile accidents, but a young boy was killed in an accident and the driver was Haitian. and inevitably he should not have been driving the car. But this is the kind of thing you will see when all of a sudden you have a move from one culture to another culture. There is something people don't want to talk about. Honestly, when you're talking about Haiti, you are talking about a very different culture than, let's say, Springfield, Ohio, or Pompeo, Florida, or Jacksonville, Florida, or Miami, Florida, or Tampa, Florida. I'm going to say what I must say honestly. When you talk about Haiti, you're talking about a failed nation and a failed culture. You're talking about a culture that fails repeatedly, that fails constantly in the terms of the most basic responsibility to create a workplace and a government. And when it comes to establishing peace and order, Haiti is a historic failure. It is basically one failure on behalf of their government to another failure on behalf of their government. Now, as a Christian, I have to say there are worldview implications and there are worldview reasons behind much of that failure. And that's not a popular thing to say. But in honest terms, we must understand the cultures have consequences, and that means the Hades culture as well. It produces consequences, and we're looking at a large percentage, a large number of Haitians moving into a community that did not expect them. You could say they are from any number of different cultures. It would be a problem, and it is particularly a problem right there in the center of Ohio, which after all is not coastal Florida, and it was not expecting this kind of influx, and it is not fair to the people of Ohio. But there's another honest part of this, and this is that industrially, there is Central Ohio was basically looking for new employees after a declining employee base. And so even as the federal government tells us that the vast majority of these Haitian immigrants are these Haitian refugees arrive with some kind of legal status, the fact is that most of them, we are told, have ended up in a town in Ohio for reasons of employment. That is also very clearly affirmed by the Republican governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, who said, yes, this is one of the reasons they're here. And by the way, this is a immigration pattern. It's one of the reasons why you have various patterns of immigrations going back centuries. And when you track this, you had few families from one political identity or nationality or ethnic identity. They show up in a place and they have extended kin begin to come. You begin to have a corner of groceries. You then start to have courses of language, groups that have been embedded into the community. It begins to grow. There are social support services that end up coming out of it. And this is one of the reasons why in large American cities, you have neighborhoods where you have a ethnic concentration precisely because culture matters, worldview matters, language matters, and this is a reason why there is such a grouping. We should also say that much of it is to do with the extended family. So, I'm trying to say, on one hand, we have the issue of immigration. I'm going to come back to that monetarily. Right now, it's the issue. It is the issue. What is the Christian responsibility? The Christians, as I think, in my hometown, responded appropriately by establishing a ministry and trying to reach out. But the cultural clash, and I just want to say honestly, was massive. It was massive in the sense because if you're looking at a worship service, it is not going to be in England or Creole equally understood. And so establishing a Haitian ministry, in this case, meant establishing a place for establishing leadership to start a financially support and spiritually nourish a community of Haitian Christians who would hopefully be able to bear witness to their own community, and there's lasting impact right now in Burrett County, Florida, from that ministry and from that church. But I want to come back to the fact that it was also very clear, even going back to the 1970s, that just isn't changing. The personal experience when I was young convinced me that even as I saw the attempts to assimilate in the public schools, it was not an easy process. It wasn't easy at all, and the cultural patterns matter. They matter immensely. When you're looking at this particular meme, this particular claim, well, the mainstream media simply says, well, there's no truth in it. Well, it appears right now, and I just want to state honestly, it appears right now that no one can produce that such a thing happened in Springfield, Ohio. So former President Trump needs to drop this for any number of reasons and move on. For instance, to issue of immigration, which is a live issue of the great American concern, and it is what's behind this issue. He needs to get to this issue, and on that issue, I will argue that Vice President Kamala Harris is extremely vulnerable. There are big arguments to be made. We need to be confronted with those arguments. Voters need to know what those arguments are. But there's something else going on when you look at the meme. You have to come to the conclusion, not as it appears, that this is something that emerged on the internet, but it didn't come from nowhere. And this is where I want to point to that I want to point out that Christians need to develop the instincts to source things. This is to say, well, is it credible? Is this truthful? We don't want to base our judgment on something that's not true. How do we know it's true? Well, there are a lot of reasons behind it. There are a lot of reasons why you believe something like this to be true, or you might doubt something as true. But let's just say that there's credibility, and it has a great deal to do with this. And I just want to state right away that one of the most credible sources you can imagine is the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay? So that's not an internet meme. It is known as the Supreme Court of the United States. It has a building in Washington, D.C. You can go to the Supreme Court of the United States. You can see it. You know exactly what anybody is talking about when they say the Supreme Court of the United States. So this takes me back to, 1993. In 1993, there was a Supreme Court case known as the Church of Lukum Bablu Ai versus Honolulu. Honolulu being a South Florida city. And this came up because of the practice of a mixture in terms of Caribbean immigrants, communities of a form of the occult paganism that included ritual killing of animals, most particularly in this case, goats. And this ran in conflict with the laws of my state of Florida. Laws in this case of the city of Hialeah, Florida. There were those who were making a case that those who are practicing this religion is often known as Santeria. This is to say it is a mixture of paganism, including occultism, that is very much rooted in animal sacrifices, mixed with Catholicism. And so you need to know that this kind of a mixture, whether it is known by the name Santeria or not, in many cases it is not. It is often referred to as voodoo. It is a mixture of the occultic and Catholic theology, and in many cases it does involve ritual slaughter of animals and then eating those animals. Okay, I'm not asking you to take my word for it. Check out this case on your own. The case at the United States Supreme Court in 1993. We need to source these things defiantly, authoritatively. I happen to know about this because I grew up in the area and I knew of the involvements. Of course, this came immediately to mind. Someone who is creating an internet meme in this case didn't necessarily create it just out of whole cloth imagination, but may have been confused in some sense, but it certainly bears responsibility for being confusing when it comes to its own particular case in Ohio town. I can't tell you that nothing like this is happening, but I'm even telling you that there's a clash of cultures that involved at least a knowledge of such things taking place. But at this current point, there's no evidence whatsoever that it is taking place, certainly with pets, in this specific Ohio town. And so our credibility and truthfulness comes down to one fact, and that is the fact that we can't go with the mainstream liberal media in saying we have no idea what you're talking about here. But it also means that we don't go with an internet meme making accusations against the immigrant community in the town like Springfield, Ohio, when we have no direct personal experience. And quite frankly, this can't be sourced to anything a reasonable person would take as authoritative. But if nothing else, let's come back to the basic worldview principle we have to return to over and over again. Worldview matters, theology matters, cultural matters. And if you are going to have a situation whereby most religious assessments, that is by most even sociological assessments, the majority of population in Haiti is involved in some secretion between Roman Catholicism and ancient voodoo practices. This is not just something I'm coming up with as a point of analysis. You can look it up in the authoritative studies. You can look it up in the terms of what is published in the academic world. Some of the same people who are all of a sudden acting like they don't know what we are talking about. And when we are talking about the authority here, just let me mention again how this authoritative this is happens to be. You just heard one case from the Supreme Court, and I also want to go to the Johns Hopkins University Press, a journal known as the American Amigo. The title, Ritual Goat Sacrifice in Haiti by Ari Key, MD. Again, that is from Johns Hopkins University. Like the Supreme Court of the United States, they take responsibility for what they say. What they publish in an article in an academic journal was sourced all the way back to the winter of 1962. Guess what? People can look it up. So for Christians, the reminder that theology matters means also, of course, that the gospel matters. And we're concerned not just here with the impact of rather the significant influx of refugees in the case of Haiti identity in a small town in Ohio. We are concerned about and for the Great Commission as to how we reach these persons, and how we reach is by our influence with the gospel of Jesus Christ. No, Trump and Harris are not the same on this other issue that I have to point to, and they're not the same on this issue either. So we're going to go to something that I wanted to talk about, something that the Catholic pontiff has said, and I'm going to affirm a rather, I will say, blatantly Protestant denial. Trump and Harris are not against life in the same way Pope Francis confuses political and theology issues, and he has done this before, and he is right back to his same old trips.
Let's take a quick break.
Has anybody ever told you you were over opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion, don't talk about faith, don't talk about politics. My name is Darrell McClain, host of Darrell McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. where he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth.
There are two related issues here that we need to discuss. And the issue of immigration is front and center right now in the American presidential election. I should say perhaps it should be in the center of the American presidential election, because I don't think Kamala Harris really wants to talk about it. And Donald Trump has not talked about it very helpfully. It would help a great deal if he would talk about the issue, which is behind what has been spending time talking about is not that issue. And so here, we just need to recognize that sometimes an external source can stir the pot, so to speak. That's exactly what happened in the case of one Pope Francis. And you have seen the headline, you may have seen it. It was in the New York Times, and they reported a story that both Harris and Trump are against life, Pope says. And so now you have a Pope, Pope Francis, a liberal Pope who is offering again some real moral and theological confusions, confusing even the teachings of his own church, from which he is supposed to be the steward of after all. So as a non-Roman Catholic, I can simply say, here you have a Roman Catholic pontiff, a Roman Catholic Pope who appears to have a less interest in defining Roman Catholic doctrine and more interest in discussing his own personal moral evaluation. He said, not using any names, but referring to the American election, he said that both candidates are against life, but for different reasons. As the New York Times reported, now, as in the advice, the Catholic voters in the upcoming U.S. presidential election, Pope Francis said, they must choose the lesser of two evils. Those are his words, because, and I quote, both are against life. Kamala Harris for her support of abortion rights, and Donald Trump for closing the doors to immigrants. The Pope said about the second issue, sending migrants away, not allowing them to grow, not letting them have life is something wrong. It's cruelty. He went on to say about abortion, sending a child away from the womb of the mother is murder, because there is life, and we must speak clearly about these things. Well, how in the world can you say you choose the lesser of two evils when your own church clearly says that murder is a grave evil, and when you find yourself, after confusing this issue by talking about a mother sending her child away in abortion, the Pope did get to use the word murder. So how in the world can you say that these are two equivalent concerns? But when it comes to abortion concerns, the Roman Catholic Church and its official teachings say this is among the most gravest sins. So he spoke of the rejection of migrants. Even the New York Times noted that this is a grave sin. And he spoke of abortion as murder, and then said they are both against life and are clearly wrong. Well, you know, when it comes to evils, when it comes to sins, they're all wrong. That's the sinfulness of sins, but they are not equal in effect. Otherwise, you're putting toddlers in prison. Now we put murderers in prison. We put toddlers in the corner, or deal with them in another form of discipline. Immigration in the United States deserves an honest conversation. Love of the neighbor does not mean confusing our immigration policy with open borders. But there's something else that is quite bothersome behind this particular issue and this particular spokesman when it comes to the Pope. Because when the Pope speaks this way, and when he speaks of immigration and refugees and migrants this way, it is not acknowledging the morality of the context nor the scale of the problem. Indeed, the Pope becomes a part of the problem. So I want to say that as a big part of the problem right now is when you have world leaders such as the Pope making a statement which basically incentivizes persons to move from one part of the world to another part of the world. Now, sometimes these individuals are genuinely refugees who are fleeing a direct threat to their lives, threat to their family, and we understand that. But we also understand that right now, the biggest cause of immigration around the world in immigration specials, even the United Nations, have all confused sources, acknowledge, and they have acknowledged that the main issue behind most people wanting to migrate from one country to the next country is economic. It is not to say that there's not repression around the world, but quite honestly, if we are simply going to say that every nation in the world is legally and morally obligated to receive everyone who is suffering repression, then the world's civilizational structure will completely break down. Now, let me just give you an example, and I want to say this as poignantly as I can. One of the strange things about the papacy, one of the strangest aspects of Catholic papacy, is that the Catholic Pope is not only the head of church, he is also the head of the state, which is called the Vatican State. It is an incredibly small piece of real estate, I must admit. And you know what? It is not saying the Pope as head of state. He is not saying all the repressed people of the world are free to come to the Vatican for refuge. This is not what he is saying. And honestly, one of the big problems right now is that you have nations all around the world who are simply saying this isn't going to work. For instance, same newspaper, same day, we're looking at the New York Times this week, the New York Times edition, the New York Times, even where there was on page 17 with Trump and Harris against life, the Pope says just very close to this in the same section, headline from the Sweden quote, Sweden plans $34,000 offer. $34,000 offer for immigrants to go home. The New York Times says that even a nation as liberal as Sweden, and this is true of many Scandinavian countries, frankly, it's true right now of an incredible number of European countries. There's simply such a uprising from the citizens of those countries against patterns of immigrations that now you have even Sweden multiplying its offer to migrants to go home by a factor of 34, increasing the amount promised from $1,000 to $34,000. Well, if Sweden is willing to give immigrants and migrants $34,000 to leave, well, it raises all kinds of questions, including what economists call preserved incentives. Now, in other words, you can evidently get $34,000 if you can get to Sweden and get Sweden to ask you to leave. Go to Sweden, create a ruckus, get $34,000, leave, go home with 34 grand in your pocket. But it also shows you that the issue of immigration is bringing pressure to just about anywhere and everywhere. So it's not just happening in America. It is not just happening in Springfield, Ohio, a town that, so far as we know, is really doing its best to deal with this challenge. It is also nations in Europe like Sweden, and just like we talked about, the fact that there was a uprising in the terms of transformation of German politics, even with a party that had not been able to gain victory in statewide elections. It won the Alliance for Germany, and a large part of it was because of the pressure coming from its citizens who were quite concerned about, guess what? Immigration. So in the United States, let's just bring it back home. This is a live issue and it deserves an honest conversation. And quite frankly, I think it also deserves something far more than just moral posturing by people like the left or the Pope. We're going to have to talk about the true challenge that we face as a nation, and we have to think about how to deal with this as far as national policy, state policy, and local policy. Just one small town in this case, and the headline is trying to deal with this challenge. How we rightly deal with this challenge, how we deal with it in the terms of national immigration policy, I do not believe that it serves the human flourishing for any nation, including the United States of America, basically to have a uncontrollable border in which cases you have to process of immigration meltdown, in that there's no real meaningful distinction between legal and illegal immigration. There's no meaningful control of the border, and Americans are rightly concerned about millions and millions of undocumented persons coming to the country. This is not without moral consequence. Yes, love our neighbor says we need to seek the welfare of all, the best of our ability. But I'm going to argue that that does not mean that confusing our immigration policy to say anyone can come and you can therefore somehow find a way to stay. This is not true, and it is not fair. It is not honest. I do not believe that any kind of righteous or just immigration policy. But I also add that it should not be so much to ask, even in a hyper-partisan, hyper-political movement we are experiencing, for at the very least, the two national presidential candidates bang the standards of the two major parties. It is not too much to ask, even to demand that they deal with the issue of immigration in an open and honest way, and to be honest and straightforward when it comes to so many of these issues. We had a consideration that neither honest nor straightforward, and quite honestly, the mainstream media has done us no favors in trying to deal with the issues when the analysis is presented to the American people. But if we begin with the Christian understanding that every single human being, considering in this the entire equation, is the entire controversy, and the entire story is a human being made in the image of God, thus every single human being deserves our respect, then we also have to respect the questions of how rightly and how to respect all of those who are presented to us in this kind of story. The issues are too deep to make them a simple matter of either the internet meme or an irresponsible headline. As Christians, let us remember to pray about this issue, and let us pray right now for communities such as Springfield, Ohio, where there are evangelical churches presented not with just a challenge, but also with the gospel opportunity. Let us pray to advance the gospel even in the context of this national controversy. I am Darrell McClain. Thank you for tuning into this week's of Over Opinionated, and we're going to pray for our host Josh Scott as he has some medical issues that he is dealing with, and we're going to end the show like Josh always likes to do with a Bible verse. A warning against hypocrisy. This is Matthew 23. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their cycleries wide and their tassels and their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi if you have one teacher and are all brothers. And you do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be servant, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you shut the door to the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who you are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea with a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, it is a bound oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift of the altar, it is a bound oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift of the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and anything and everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and those who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, teachers of the law, Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cucumber, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out and got but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgences. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and the dish, and the outside also will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law of the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to the people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law, Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets, and you decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if he had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken a part with them shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourself that you are descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you blood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you the prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify, others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on the earth, for the blood of the righteous of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chick under her wings, yet you are not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.